Starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
Healthcare Access and Information, or HCAI, CAN 1-7-15 ACDs rehabilitation. This presentation is brought to you by HCAI's Building Standards Unit, which will be going over changes to the approved work, 8 types of NMAs, purpose, signing, concurrence, and some examples, and much, much more. If you haven't done so already, feel free to download the handout that's provided to you, which is the actual CAN 1-7-153, and today's presentation in a PDF format for your use. We are going to be here for about an hour and a half or maybe 2 hours, depending on how many questions we get from you. So hang on, and we have a lot of good information for you to take in. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type those questions into the go-to question box on that docking station. If you have a question, we'll get to those questions at the end of the presentation the best that we can. Please be sure to keep your questions generic during the presentation, but if you have a specific question, send that over to regsunit@hcai.ca.gov. Again, that's regsunit@hcai.ca.gov. If you have transmission difficulties, please log out and log back in using the same login information that the go-to software sent you, and we will do the same if we have transmission difficulties. Today's for presenters, we have Mr. Richard Tannehill, who is the FDD Acting Deputy Division Chief and Building Standards Unit Supervisor. And in the background, we're going to have Lori Campbell, who is an Associate Governmental Program Analyst, answering questions in that go-to box. So once again, thank you for joining us. And Richard, if you're there, I hand the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Caesar. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We have a lot to cover today, so I'm just going to jump right into it. So first of all, I'm Richard Tannehill. I'm the supervisor of the Building Standards Unit, where we do write a lot of the cans and pins, as well as code. And I'm currently acting deputy division chief. So we'll get right into it with, we're partnering with the AIA California. So if you want AIA credits, please contact your local representative on how to. Okay. So getting into this right away, on our website under codes and regulations, we have posted the new CAN 1-7-153. In addition to the CAN, we also have uploaded the new change form and change log that are both examples, and we'll go through those later on. But I just want to show you where you can get those. The handout, the CAN is also part of the handouts. So there's a tab on here that you can download the handouts straight from GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar. So you can do that at any time. Okay. The new CAN, I just want to make sure everyone gets the right one. We actually released this originally March 3rd, but did some quick revisions on the 30th of the same month. Again, you can download this from our website, or it's also, you can download it as a webinar handout that's available right now. This area here, the March 30th date is on there, just some minor tweaks on that. So, and we'll cover that as we go through. So this presentation will be directed toward that revision. Please note that there's going to be a lot of text in this, so I'll try not to bore you too much with that. But it's important that we look at what the code says and what the CAN says. So we're going to jump right in with some definitions. The first one is material alter as applied to construction projects. Construction documents, approved construction document means any change or alteration or modification is determined by the office that alters the scope of a project, could cause the project to be in non-compliance with the California Building Code, or causes unreasonable risk to the health and safety of patients, staff, or public. Again, going through these definitions is important to understand the purpose and the intent of the CAN. So again, I apologize, but we'll be doing a lot of reading, especially this first part. We're going to be looking at the different types of changes in the work. Okay, well, for changes of the approved work, changes shall be executed in substantial conformance with the construction documents approved by the office. Changes to the work shall be made by amended construction documents approved by the office. Changes in the work include, but are not limited to the following: corrections of errors in design and or construction to bring the construction documents or construction into compliance with applicable codes. Okay, changes in the scope of work and additional work required because of discovered conditions. Basically what the code is telling us here is anything that you change is subject to review and approval. Okay, but we're going to make some exceptions to that as we move forward here. But only changes that material alter the work shall be submitted to the office for review. So the key here is the material alter, and that's kind of the intent of this CAN, is to define what's material and what's not non-material. So changes that do not materially alter the work, the following types of changes do not materially alter the work and do not require submission of amended construction documents to the office. This was added to the building code, I believe in the 2019 section, and the CAN actually was rescinded at that time because it ended up in code. Over the last couple of years since then, we continue to receive a lot of questions on non-material work. And so we decided to resurrect the CAN and just improve on it, include some process changes, as well as additional examples. Okay. And so what we're going to do right now is just go through, there's 8 things that are 8 items that are classified as types of non-material alterations. So we're going to go through those. And again, this is the part where we do a lot of reading just because it's important to understand each one of them, and you'll see why as we go on. But the first one is clarifications or interpretation by the responsible design professional. Now this one most likely is going to be a non-material altered, but it can be, how I look at it, there's 3 categories. There's non-material altered, there's material altered, which is an ACD, and there's things that we don't really need to see at all. So some clarifications, like what color is the wall, we don't need to see that at all. If you're adding a dimension, if there was a dimension missing on the plan and you receive an RFI or is an ASI is issued to basically define that depth, that dimension, but you're not changing the plan, you're just providing a dimension. Again, that's something that we do not need to see at all. Okay. But clarification and interpretation of the plans and specifications by the design professional is non-material. Under the note, it states that if calculations by a structural engineer or a delegated structural engineer are necessary to determine the structural, non-structural adequacy, then it becomes material and does need to be submitted as an ACD. The second type of NMA is construction means and methods, such as construction sequencing, coordination of work, and methods of assembly and construction. Construction means and methods do not include work that would require alternate methods of compliance or an alternate methods means of protection. So if an AMC or an AMP is required, it is no longer non-material. Also note that temporary construction, such as temporary exiting, air handlers, or different types of equipment that are provided are not considered means and methods. They are actually part of the project and need to be included in the project scope. The third type of non-material alteration is substitution of equipment, products, or materials. Okay. The equipment, product, or material substituted must be code compliant and must perform the same function and be equal or less than, have the same, basically the same capacities as the product it's replacing. Okay, must not increase loads or lateral gravity for structural frame members and must meet the design requirements for the project. If it meets those requirements, it would be considered non-material. Changing from one type of equipment, product, or material to another, such as changing from drilled-in concrete anchors to concrete screws, or changing the top of wall fire-resistant material design is not considered non-material because you're changing the design of what's being installed. Okay. And again, if calculations are required, it is no longer considered non-material. Now, type 4 is where we run into a lot of issues. New details are based on other approved details. What is this? Actually, we rarely see this, and it rarely, when we do see attempts at this, it rarely makes the cut, just because it's very hard when you're adding a new detail, because are they substantially different from what was previously approved? One of the examples of this that I have seen is where they were removing a window and filling a wall. And in this case, the window happened to be in a stucco wall, and they had some other windows that were not in a stucco wall. It's a different type of finished material on the exterior of the building, but the infill for the framing of the window was the same. And so that was allowed to be done as an NMA, because all they're installing the same infill for that window, and all they're doing is adding the patching of existing material on there. If this happens, the same one was also applied to a door, and now that is no longer non-material because that door has different type of framing and different requirements for that infill. So again, this one's there's a fine line there, actually a very blurry line there to divide there. But mainly this is, for the second part of this, is kind of why this item is in there. And this includes reference standards or pre-approved details can be added as non-material. So if you're using our pre-approved details off the website, they can be added as part of as non-material to your project once it's under construction. Type 5 is final routing configurations of ducts, conduits, and pipes, etc. These are typically shown diagrammatically on the approved plans. And if they are, the routing changes, again, that would be considered non-material. The exception to this is if there are additional fire smoke dampers required and pre-approved seismic fittings or specially engineered braces or hangers. Those would not require, or those would be considered material changes once you start adding fire smoke dampers, etc. The sixth type are dimensional changes to a room that do not affect code required minimum dimensions, fixed dimensions, or minimum room or space requirements or clearances. I mentioned earlier about adding a dimension that we don't need to see it. That is adding a missing dimension that doesn't change the design. But if you do have the dimensions shown, say if you want to move a door over or add something a wall, say move a wall, and it's not going to affect the code required minimum dimensions, like if a patient room has to be 120 square feet, it's not going to affect either side of that wall. That can be done as non-material. Okay. Note that applicable code sections and minimum dimensions and space requirements must be shown on the plans for confirmation. Okay, so you do need to provide drawings on this to show that you are complying with those code requirements. And type 7 is kind of similar to, I was mentioning before, relocation of doors, windows, electrical outlets, electrical switches, plumbing fixtures, etc., that do not require additional changes to the work. So basically, you're relocating a door from one part of the room to another, but you're still maintaining all the code required clearances for both accessibility and for any other clearances that may be required. That can be done as a non-material altered change. And the last type is relocation and reconfiguration of cabinetry. Okay, if you're not encroaching into the minimum required clearances that are in that room, you are able to do that as a you can basically revise the cabinetry configuration, etc., as a non-material change. Okay. Applicable code sections and minimum dimensions and space requirements must still be shown on the plans for confirmation by the field staff. So, and the last part of this piece is changes to the approved work. If the architect, this is all of the stuff I've been reading so far is all straight from the code. If the architect or engineer in responsible charge of a project determines that the changes to the approved documents are necessary, but they do not materially alter the work, all such changes shall be stamped and signed and approved design professionals by the approved design professionals pursuant to section 7-115 of the administrative code. That is no different from any other change that you're making to your drawings. Okay, that is not a new requirement. That has always been there. All changes in the work are to concurrence of the field staff as to whether or not the change materially alters the work. So we do need to still see them. Documentation of those changes. Again, the architect or engineer responsible charge shall maintain a log of all changes in the work of construction. That log shall indicate whether the office has made a determination as to whether the change is materially altered or not. Okay, the date that that determination was made and who made it. The log shall be made on the project site by the inspector's field records, with the inspector's field records. Now, this can be your existing log. The log that we provide as a handout that's shown in the back of the can is just an example. You can create your own logs. You may have your own logs already. You can just add, if you can just add a NMA for non-material altered change on that log would be appreciated and help the process. Part of the intent of this can is to clarify what's required, but also to set a process. And it's really to streamline the process to get these concurred with. So again, we get a lot of questions on this log, because the code already requires you to maintain a log of all your changes. And everyone asks, do I need an NMA log that's specific to NMAs? And the answer is no. You can merge it with your other one. So whatever works for you, that's fine. It just needs to be clear which ones are NMAs and which ones are approved and not approved. Here's an example of a change form that we have included. Again, the change form is only an example. You can do your own forms, and but it needs to include at a minimum this information. This shouldn't be a problem for most of you because we actually took a lot of the change forms that were out there for ASIs, et cetera, and modified it to include the additional information for an NMA. If you note right here, there's a place for HCAI concurrence. That will either be the initials and date of our staff, or it may be a concurrence stamp that they'll put on there. So one of these does need to be attached to each NMA. And note that we have a subject area here and a description. We have the same thing in the log. You'll be seeing the log on the next slide, but this is a little bit more detailed subject, a little bit more room for a description. The idea is if we can read the log and approve it with the log, I'll jump over to the log. You have the same information here, but a lot less room. This is an Excel document if you download it from our website, so it does expand when you type in it. But what's important here is the NMA number. It must be distinct, and an HCAI concurrence. And the log is just going to say yes or no. Do they concur or not? The ACD number, again, is for your use if it does turn into an ACD. And then also the type of material alter change, the 1 through 8 items that we just reviewed are also included down here. One of those items at a minimum must be shown to show why it is considered non-material. Okay, and the idea here is when you're looking, meeting with the field staff, that they can look at this log. If the change is clear and the description is very simple and it's clearly non-material altered, the idea they can just sign the form We'll go back to the form real quick. They'll just sign and date the form here, say, yes, I can agree this is non-material. If the log doesn't have enough information, because there's not a lot of room here, they can go to the form, read what's on the form, and still at that point, decide if they want to just concur at that point or not. If more information is still required, they just want to get a better picture of what this is, then this should be attached to the drawings, if any. Again, an NMA can be completely verbal in text only, but drawings do go a long way to help this. But a NMA form, change form, should be attached to each NMA. And if the HCAI staff does concur, they'll either initial and date this or put some type of a concurrent stamp on there and return that to you. And then you will use that to update your log and also have proof that it's been concurred with. Okay. And that's actually the change we made from the initial CAN that was released. We actually were approving it on the log, and we received some comments that the log was very difficult to maintain because it was ongoing. It was a living document, whereas the forms can stand alone with each of the each NMA. So the purpose of the CAN is really to determine help you decide what's material altered versus non-material. But another alternate purpose to this CAN is to streamline the process, set a process that everyone can expect to do the same thing. So it's meeting expectations for both our staff as well as industry as to what's going to be required when looking at non-material altered changes. Okay. The administrative code requires that changes made during construction that are in compliance with approved documents be submitted to HCAI for approval as amended set of construction documents prior to installation of the work. Basically, again, the default is everything needs to be reviewed and approved by us. But HCAI has determined that items that do not affect code requirements may be considered non-material and do not require an amended construction document to be submitted. Okay, this CAN is to help clarify that distinction and provide both examples for material and non-material changes. Okay. Okay, an amended construction document, an ACD, is a contractual document between the owner, the designer, and the builder. HCAI will only review changes during construction that materially alter the work. Okay, we do not review NMAs. We do concur when you need to see them. Changes of this nature shall be submitted for approval as an amended set of construction documents or an ACD. These are materially altered changes. Okay. For signing by the architect or engineer, this is where we've been getting a little bit of a few comments about this. Stamping and or signing by the NMA by the architect or engineer is representing that they are accepting responsibility that the NMA will not cause the project to be in non-compliance with the building code or cause an unreasonable risk to the health, safety of patient, staff, and public. And we're going to get a little bit, there's another slide here about stamping and signing. The reason it says stamping and or signing is because the design professional that's making the change does need to stamp and sign their drawings as they would per 7-115, as you would on any project. And the design professional of record only needs to sign the items, okay? But by signing, you're basically stating that it is in compliance as a non-material change. All changes in the work are subject to concurrence by the field staff as to whether or not the change materially alters the work. Again, that is in the code, that concurrence must happen. The architect or engineer in sponsor charge shall maintain the change log. We discussed this. In which all changes in the work are clearly recorded and identified as either materially altered work or not materially altered. And what makes it sounds repetitive because it's actually in the language that we read in the code earlier. Okay. Our concurrence of the change will be done by review, as I mentioned, if possible, by review of the change log, and if more information is needed, by the change form. Okay, the change log shall be made by the design professional of record with adequate descriptions in the change log to give a clear idea of what the change is. What we get a lot when there are changes, it'll say something like miscellaneous electrical changes. That doesn't do any good for us to know what that change is. And again, the goal is to get these concurred with as quickly as possible. So if you have on there that relocating electrical outlet in soil and utility room, it may probably get signed at that point. Okay. But it should have a clear definition of what the name and definition of description of what the change is. Change form should have the same information, but there's more space for additional information, and you can also attach drawings and sketches to the form. Okay, again, it's very important that we offer enough definition to the field staff that their concurrence may be obtained. So that is on the design professional making the change to provide just a clear, simple description of what that change is. We often get questions like, oh, can't we group them? And the answer is no. You're going to see this in a little bit, but we often get in one NMA that could be 100 pages and have 150 different NMAs on it. That is no longer a quick review. So it takes a lot of time for us to first figure out what the changes are and piece it together. And then just takes a lot of time to do the concurrence. Okay. If there is not enough information to get the concurrence on the drawings, the change becomes materially altered and requires an ACD. Now, the staff do have the option just to leave it blank and say, resubmit this the next time that we meet, and we will look at it again. But if it comes back again, if there's not information, it becomes an ACD and has to go through the full review process. HCAI does not plan review NMA documents, and concurrence is determined by the field staff based on the information provided by the design professionals. If we don't have that information on the form and the log, we cannot make that determination. So by default, it becomes an ACD. Okay, concurrence will only be noted on the NMA change form. As I mentioned, we'll basically stamp or sign the change form and return it to you. And that's your record that it has been reviewed and should be annotated in the log accordingly. When submitting documents for an NMA concurrence, you want to include the following information. This would be on the change form. You want a distinct NMA number identifying it. Even if you're mid-project, you can start with NMA 1. We are not looking for the NMA to be called ASI 2 or Rfi 58 or whatever. We need a distinct NMA number that is only for that. Doesn't mean you can't convert an RFI or an ASI into an NMA, just means it has to have a distinct number. And that can be as simple as writing an NMA number on that same sheet. Okay, stamp in the signature from the architect or engineer of record for changes prepared under their charge of the project. And that is according to the administrative code. And adequate description of the proposed change. Again, that's really important because we need, if we can read it and understand that this is NMA, you're done, we move on to the next one. Okay, adequate reference to all affected portions of the construction. This would be if you have several sheets that are included on that, you can list the sheets, but the idea is that, say if you're revising a door and it affects the ceiling plan, we don't need to, you need to annotate those sheets that are affected, but all we need to know is that door is changing. We don't need to know the ceiling plan's changing because of that door. We don't need to know all the different versions of that floor plan that are changing, equipment plan, furniture plan, etc. We just need to know the one thing, I'm changing this door. Okay, If there are updated air balance sheets or electrical calculations, that can be considered one NMA. So you might have an air balance with 10, 15 revisions on it. That can be considered as one NMA if it's truly non-material. Okay. References to the specific section, as we talked about, the 8 types of non-material need to be included. And this note is very important that we only want to see one change per NMA. And that's where we're getting the most pushback. As I said, people want to group them together. But keep in mind that if it's very simple, an NMA in itself, by definition, should be a very simple change. You add a form, identify what that change is. When you sit down with us or meet with us to concur, we'll go through those a lot quicker than if we're trying to figure out which one of these apply to the 100 sheets that you have provided us. Concurrence from the appropriate design professional that the changes to the approved construction documents are necessary, but do not materially alter the work. Again, this is where your signature on the change form signifies that you accept this change as non-material. You're making that decision as a professional. So getting back to stamping and signing. On the drawings, the same thing for any ACD. Again, this is all in the code. It's nothing new. You need a signature from the architect or engineer responsible for charge of the project. You need a stamp and signature of the architect or engineer that prepared the changes for the scope under their control. Okay, there shouldn't be any questions there. Where we do get the questions is the stamp and signature from the architect or engineer responsible charge of the project. Again, we're told that that's not per the Practice Act, but we do consider the NMA form as an instrument of service. This is part of the change that you're showing us. And all you're doing is stating that this form is this change is considered non-material, and it's to the best of your professional judgment that is considered non-material. And the reason we're doing this is actually to help you. When we put this together, we actually interviewed a lot of people. We had a lot of people involved in this. And what we had heard was that a lot of contractors and sometimes even owners were kind of coercing the architect or engineers to make things NMA so they can proceed with the work without doing the ACD and waiting for it. And that is abuse of this system. There is actually nothing in the code that allows any change to proceed without prior to approval. We do allow that for NMAs, that the work can proceed prior to concurrence, but it must truly be an NMA, a non-materially altered change. Okay. So by requiring your stamp and signatures, making you put some consideration into this, that this is truly a non-material altered change, and also gives you some ammunition if somebody is trying to pressure you into making something an NMA so they can proceed. You have the ability to say, no, this is truly not, in my opinion, an NMA and is material and needs to be addressed as such. So concurrence should be generally no more than 5 minutes observation for our staff. And that gets back to the one item per NMA. If you give us a sheet with 100 NMAs, it's going to take hours to review that, not 5 minutes. So again, by putting the time limit on there, it's just to kind of keep the process moving. It's to simplify. An NMA should be as simple as that. Most of them should take no more than 30 seconds to a minute to look at. If we have to dig that deep, yes, we're allowing some time. Okay, and we say generally on purpose. It's not like, okay, you go on over 5 minutes, we're stopping this review. It's just to kind of give some guidance on what would be required. Each NMA observation shall be a binary decision by the HCAI field staff and does not involve any back and forth. So no back checks on this. Again, by definition, an NMA should be very simple. If it's debated, it should be an ACD. Reference to at least one of the 8 items defining the type of NMA is required. Again, the 8 items are shown here. kind of beat this to death, but it's important that it falls under one of these comfortably. Okay, NMAs may be submitted in many formats, including ASIs, SIs, CCDs, Rfis. It is acceptable to include these numbers for project-specific tracking. We actually have a spot on the form for your own tracking numbers, but you must assign a distinct NMA number to it, so that, and it should be logged accordingly and hopefully searchable to make it easy for you. Searchable in the log to be able to distinguish which NMAs still need concurrence and which ones are still open. Okay, note that any work performed, again, you can move forward with work on an NMA basis, but any work that is done so, that is found to be material, can be subject to further review and possible destructive investigation if something was covered up. Again, we never want to get there. But basically, we're taking your word that these things are non-material, and if they are found to be material after the fact, you may need to justify what was actually built. During HCAI field staff concurrence of NMAs, if the HCAI representative determines that the DPOR has repeatedly not followed directions in the scan, so if they're constantly doing what this exactly says not to do, if we get repeated determinations of something's material after it's been built, it will be reported to the RCO by the compliance officer or fire life safety officer or DSE. And the RCO will discuss that with the abuser and try to correct that action. Again, these are things we're setting in place so that there's no coercion of being forced into making something get done. Because again, I just want to remind you that in the code, there is no allowance for something to proceed without it previously being approved. We do not review RFIs or ASIs. We don't want to see them. We don't review them. Don't give them to us, okay? Don't ask us to review RFIs. Now, it is okay to, if you have an RFI you do not, or an ASI, that you do not know if it's NMA or not material altered or not, to ask the question. Don't call it a review of the RFI or the ASI or the whatever IB or whatever it might be. It is okay to ask the question, or I'm not sure if this RFI should be converted to an NMA or not. That's kind of the last part of this. Any of these instruments that you're asked questions about, an RFI is a contractual document or a document between the contractor and the design professional to get information, a request for information. You can answer that question, and it may not be material, and it may be material. It's the design professional's discretion or determination to convert that RFI or an ASI into an NMA if they decide that it is a non-material altered change, or it may be an ACD and can be submitted, converted to an ACD as well. But what we're saying is if it is converted from an RFI or an ASI to an NMA, it needs its distinct number, and we do need to see it, okay? So please don't ask us to review RFI logs, and you should not be getting any requests from our staff to review any RFI logs. That is not our realm of responsibility or authority. That is something for you to use on the site for your own use. But if any of those items are determined to be non-material or material, we do need to see them. In the CAN are various, by each discipline, we have various examples. These examples were in the previous CAN. We have expanded on that list to give more examples, and we also added stuff from the Freer's manual that did not require review, or maybe did require review as not as material. We added those as well, so they were all in alignment together. So if you look at the Freer's manual, it says the same thing that this material alter CAN would say. So this is Appendix A in the CAN. It's several pages of different disciplines. There's a lot of stuff on architectural, fire, life safety, structural, mechanical, electrical, and even civil. Okay, as I just mentioned, Appendix A shows the examples. Appendix B is the change form example. And again, if you're told that you have to use our specific form, that is not true. Let us know what's happening and we will correct that. You are allowed to use your own form and you are allowed to use your own log. Appendix C in the CAN is an example only of the log. Okay. Go through a few tips and then we'll get into questions here soon. Determine if an NMA or ACD status, what is it? What do you have here? Or in other cases, nothing at all, nothing required. So if you have a document, is it an NMA or is it an ACD? If it's an NMA, we go to item 2, where you prepare the log and the form for that NMA. Okay, both are required. So for your reviewing NMAs with the staff, if they're sitting down with you on site, or if you're emailing it to them, that's between you and them how it's done. But they do need a copy of the log and the form. Okay, again, provide a description so that a decision can be made based on it. Do not, if you use the word miscellaneous, don't say miscellaneous mechanical or miscellaneous architectural details. That doesn't tell us anything. An NMA number must be assigned regardless what the design team calls it. You can call it an RFI, an ASI, CO, whatever you want. But if you're submitting as an NMA, it must have an NMA number. And again, you can start this in the middle of a project. If you have a project ongoing, you haven't been doing this, you can start with number 1. It doesn't matter if it's RFI 58 or whatever. Use proper industry terminology. Okay, these are NMAs. Please call them NMAs. Don't refer to them as RFIs. It just adds confusion. We get this. We've been getting this a lot over the last few weeks. I want to schedule some time to review my RFIs. No, we don't review RFIs, but it says you have to concur with them. No, we only concur with NMAs. So make sure we're talking the same language when we're referring to non-material altered changes. Again, 1 item per NMA. Again, this is where we're getting the most pushback, but it's actually will simplify the process. Yes, it may take an extra form, be filled out, but it should really speed up the process when we're concurring with them. Again, generally no more than 5 minutes for review. Maybe multiple disciplines. It should be a single item, but it could affect electrical, architectural, mechanical, etc. That does not prohibit it. That is not considered multiple NMAs. It's just 1 change. Should be a binary decision. Yes, it is an NMA or it's not. Should be that simple. NMAs will be looked at when staff are on site unless other arrangements are made in advance. Again, there's many ways that you can present to the HCAI field staff. If you're used to working with one, or if you have one that's showing up at your site, you might want to contact them, see what their preferences, see if they're going to be on site. I've found that it's easiest if they do them when you're sitting down together and flip through them just like you would an OTC for an ACD. Go through, walk our staff through the changes. Don't have them throw it at them and have them try to figure it out. If you take it to them and say, okay, on this NMA 4, we're moving this door over 5 inches. On NMA 5, we're adding some electrical outlets, but aren't increasing the load, something like they were deleting electrical outlets. It goes much quicker if you walk them through it, but that's not always available. So coordinate with your field staff how they want to receive them and who should be receiving them. Are they for the compliance officer, fire life safety, or just district structural engineer? Okay, so you can email them, but include a log and the form with your emails, but arrange it with them, coordinate this with them. And it may be a matter of doing a Teams meeting or a online meeting with them to kind of go through these. You can present them on the screen. Again, there's many options for this. We're not going to restrict how they're done. So that's really very flexible. Okay, have the log with you at all sessions. NMAs do not need to be converted to ACDs after concurrence. So after you get 10 or 15 NMAs approved, and typically, this is another question, how do we document our changes on the drawings? Basically, you do it the same way you would an RFI or an ASI. You cloud the change, put a delta and the NMA number on there. That'll identify that as an NMA that was hopefully reviewed and concurred with. But you do not need to roll those into an ACD. If you do submit an ACD with the sheet with those changes, you can reflect those changes on that sheet. Okay, if they've been, especially if they've been concurred with. If they haven't been, you probably want to keep them clouded and deltaed at that point. If there is a question or whether or not it is NMA, don't be afraid to ask the question. Again, don't ask them to review your RFIs to determine if they're NMA. If you have a specific question, send it to them, say, hey, I'm not sure we're doing this. Is this NMA? Okay. Again, we want we're going to be learning along with you. We want the best decisions to be made. We don't want anyone getting into trouble with these. So please ask. Again, along with asking, don't abuse the use of NMAs or be pressured into making them ACDs when they should have been an NMA, okay? And that is it. I see a lot of questions, so we can go into the Q&A. Caesar?
Great, thank you, Richard. So we have a lot of great questions here, but I want to pose a scenario to you, Richard, dealing with NMAs. So as it comes to an NMA and the approved construction documents, if an approved set of if a set of construction documents gets approved with comment, and when it comes to UL listings, the approved comment says provide UL listings for head of wall, for example, but there's no specific UL listing provided. And then a DPOR comes back and says, well, now I want to provide an NMA for concurrence, but it has, for example, 86 different listings or UL listings in that NMA, and the listings vary in application from pipe and cable penetrations versus head of wall. Is that an NMA or is that an ACD?
Well, that's a long question. Can you go over the highlights for me real quick? So
there's approved construction documents that were approved with comment from the office.
Okay, but I'll stop you there for a second. If we're approving with comments, hopefully it's only going to take an NMA to resolve it. And approved with comment should also be that simple. It's not always going to be the case. There's going to be an exception where an ACD is required. And the fact that they reviewed it and they're asking for additional information, but it's not significant enough to require a back check, that in itself should mean it's pretty mild and could be done with an NMA. Again, not always the case, but go on.
And not always the case. So that's kind of what we're getting at. So the approved comment or the comment on the approved set of construction documents says provide UL listings for head of wall, for example. Well,
okay.
And that's how it's approved. But now the DPR comes back and says, hey, I have 86 different types of UL listings that I want you to look at as an NMA and concur with. Now, the listings they vary in application from pipe and cable penetrations versus a head of wall detail or a UL listing. Is that considered an NMA or is that considered an ACD?
Well, NMAs would be providing standard details, standard industry details as to the drawings, like listings can be added as NMA. Same with our pre-approved details. I actually have a problem personally with the approved with comments being done when you don't have any listings, because now you're approving something you have no idea what it is. But now I know there's for our fire life safety for penetration details, there's actually a general note on there that goes on there and say provide these during construction, what's going to be used and those can be added as, again, it depends on what it is. Unfortunately, I have to say that it depends. That's kind of the famous answer. But standard listing details, if they apply to the project, do not change the design in any way, can be added as NMAs. Same with our approved details. We actually had this conversation yesterday, and there's a difference in opinion on that because, well, you have to verify sometimes structural capacity or fire life safety ratings and stuff. That is up to the design professional to put together and present it in a way that it can be considered an NMA. Now, typically, like I said, approved with comment should be handled through NMAs if possible. And I actually personally have more of a concern with 76 listings not being included in the original project.
And that would be the similar situation here where the original listing is not provided on the original set of construction documents, and it's later submitted as an NMA, which requires a significant amount of review, and is it may be. Go ahead.
Well, let's back up a second. Then you have 76 listings. Are they going to be reviewed in 5 minutes?
Well, that's the question. So will 86 UL listings be reviewed?
No. They're not going to be able to review them. That's going to be an ACD. That's going to throw it into an ACD category. Now, if there's only one listing that was missing and they want to add it, NMA. That make it clear, because again, if we get something with 76 items or 100 items or even 15 to 20 items, it's no longer going to take 5 minutes to look at. It's going to take more than 5 minutes to figure out what's being proposed. But if you give me one item, I'm going to be able to look at that and tell you within, like I said, literally in seconds, if that's an NMA or not.
Great.
That's where we're trying to go. And again, that wasn't ever previously required. It just wasn't really enforced this way.
Thank you, Richard. And that's a clarification that we were looking for, is if it's going to take a lengthy amount of time to review a proposed NMA, even if it is a UL listing, but it has 76 or 86 or 100 UL listings that is submitted as an NMA, then it's going to take more than 5 minutes or 6 minutes to review.
Correct. Now, again, if it's one listing or two listings and you're just adding them, should be no big deal. Should be an NMA.
Great. Thank you, Richard, for that. We have a bunch of other questions here. The first question we'll go with is, what is the HCAI policy regarding number of instances of occurrences where HCAI does not concur with the Dpor regarding NMA designations?
Is that asking for what's the record?
What is the number of instances or occurrences where HCAI does not concur? Is it something that's typical, or is it something that is atypical?
We released this like 3 weeks ago, so we don't have that data. We don't track that data. Perfect.
So question going back to a UL listing. Does a change in UL fire stopping and ACD, is it an ACD or is it an NMA?
For a fire stopping detail? Sorry.
Yeah, so the question reads, does the change in UL fire stopping, is that an ACD or is that an NMA?
It depends if they're changing the detail, if they're changing the material. If you're going from a fire stopping change, just changing the fire stopping itself to a different product, if it meets the same requirements, it's just an NMA. It's just a substitution at that point. That would fall under, I believe, item 2 of the type 2.
Type 2. All right. And then we have a question here that's asking, if a contractor is requesting to change a bolted connection to a welded connection, is that considered a material change?
No. Yes, it is considered a material change. You're changing the design, how it's attached to the building. You're changing the requirement. I think that's also item 3 of the type 3 of the material alter change.
All right, and then we'll power through these questions real quick. For exception 5, if I'm moving existing piping or ductwork or med gases due to existing conditions preventing the permitted work to be installed per the approved plans, is that considered an NMA?
If you're just relocating the path, it is considered an NMA. Now, if you have to do additional penetrations and add fire protection of some sort, then it may get kicked into the ACD category. As a general rule, a lot of that's considered diagrammatic or schematic, and the routing is not, should not require an ACD. Now, if that rerouting triggers other types of construction that's not already approved in the plans, I mean, if you have those penetration details in the plans already, or if you add them via the pre-approvals, it should still remain an NMA.
Perfect, thank you. Richard, we have another question, and several questions actually, regarding RFIs and how this fits into the CAN. So the question reads, please explain how an RFI fits into this CAN and if it needs stamping and signing.
The answer is no. It does not fit into the CAN, and it does not require stamping and signing. An RFI is instructions to the contractor to clarify an issue. We don't even need to see RFIs. We don't review RFIs. We shouldn't be asked to review RFIs, and we shouldn't be asking to review RFIs. Now that RFI, say if the RFI was saying, asking for a clarification, and in the answering of that RFI, it was determined that the door has to be relocated because that there was a conflict of some sort. There was a column or something discovered in the building, and so you have to relocate that door over. Now that RFI can be converted to an NMA. So you can actually take the actual RFI response, put an NMA number on it, and then attach an NMA form and submit that as an NMA. They do not remain RFIs at that point. So that's what I was saying earlier. Do not ask us to review RFIs, because our staff are told, do not review RFIs, so you're going to get a no. Now, again, if you have an RFI, you're not sure if it's NMA or not, and you say, can you look at this to tell me if it's NMA? Go ahead and ask the question. Just make it clear that you're not asking them to review your RFIs, because like you said, there's several questions on this, very similar on this presentation alone. We got a lot yesterday at the presentation we did, the same type of question. So again, using proper terminology is going to really help distinguish between what's NMA, what's RFI, what's ASI.
Perfect, thank you, Richard. We have another question, kind of not similar, but still mentions RFIs. But it's asking, is a Dpor stamp required on the NMA change form, or is it only required on an RFI?
Change form, the NMA change form. We don't care what's on the RFI. Actually, if you're changing the drawings by code, you have to stamp and sign the drawings, period. Again, if you're answering an RFI and just providing a sketch or a picture to the contractor to answer it, no, you don't need to stamp and sign that. If you're converting it to an NMA or an ACD, both of those are signifying that there's a change to the drawings, and those do require a stamp and signature. Again, that's nothing that we're adding new. That's always been in the code for years.
All right. The next question, Richard, is specific to the log. It says CAC 7-153E requires the log to include the name of the office staff who made the determination. The log provided by HCAI does not have a location to include the name of staff. Will there be an updated log including this column?
A good point. Originally, we had the HCAI staff signing the log, so that would be determining who did it. So I would, if you have, there should be a space to see who approved it. Yes, that is true. We'll have to make that correction to the downloadable example, but you can always add that yourself. Because originally the HCAI staff was going to initial, just like on a TIO, the log. So that would designate who did it. If you have the form available, I think you're covered, because the form's going to have the approver's signature and stamp. But technically, yes, it should include the name of who did it. Again, we're not going to, we are no longer requiring our staff to touch the form other than to verify if things are filled in. That's a good point.
Thanks, Richard. We do have a question here that's asking about stamping the NMA changes. It says, I understand the DPOR must stamp MA changes and ACDs, but I do not follow why the DPOR needs to stamp NMA changes.
Can you read that again? Because it kind of said the same thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit, but it says, I understand the DPOR must stamp the materially alternating changes and ACDs, but I do not follow why the DPOR needs to stamp the non-material changes.
Because it's a change to the approved construction drawings. It's right in the code. Any change to the approved construction drawings must be stamped and signed. Even if an RFI changes, and I say RFI on purpose here, even if the RFI changes the drawings, in theory and by code, it should be stamped and signed by the design professional noting a change. That in itself would be converted to an NMA and given to us for concurrence. That is something that is in the code and has been in the code for several years. So an NMA is a change to the design. It's just not a material change to the design. It is still a change. If it wasn't a change, we don't need to see it. If you're not changing the design, we don't need to see it. So the fact that you're submitting an NMA saying there is a change, but it's considered non-material, still requires a stamp and signature.
Okay. HCAI, in quotations, that says, HCAI will only review changes made during construction that materially alter the work, end quotation. In the past, we've included NMA changes and the ACDs along with MA changes. Should NMA changes not be included in ACDs?
No, they should not. They should become separate. And again, the reason is an NMA, you can proceed with the work prior to approval. An ACD cannot. So if you want that work to proceed, don't include it as an ACD. Submit it as an NMA, single item, get it concurred with, move. You don't even have to wait for it to be concurred with to continue with the work, but it just streamlines the process. Because what we get a lot, and again, it may be forced into this, if you group 10 NMAs into an NMA, it goes over the 5-minute rule, if you will, it becomes an ACD. Now it's going to go through the process of an ACD, cannot proceed with work, and will also delay approval of that ACD just because there's more things has to go through the full system. So again, by doing this, we're trying to streamline the process, not provide more work, but get you moving faster.
All right,
I don't know
we
if
have
a question or not, but don't, if you have a bunch of NMAs on an ACD, we probably will review it. We'll probably also mention that these don't need to be ACDs because again, it's going to take more time. You have to pay to have the ACD reviewed. You don't have to pay to have an NMA concurred with. Something else to keep in mind.
Also, I want to keep kind of mention and take this opportunity to mention that if you do have a specific question, feel free to send us an email over to regsunit@hcai.ca.gov. Again, that's regsunit@hcai.ca.gov. Next question for you, Richard, is I'm not understanding how this form is different than the RFI. The RFI has the same information.
It has a different number on it. It has an RFI number on it. We need an NMA number. Could be the exact same form. It doesn't have to be, it has to be specific to an NMA. We are constantly asked to review RFI logs. We are constantly asked to review RFIs. Yes, the forms may be very similar or may be identical, and you just put RFI 1 versus NMA 1, depending on what it is. We don't care which form you use as long as its information is on there. But we do, if it comes in as an RFI form with an RFI number, we are not going to review it. So the forms can be identical. That's not the point. The point is we need to be reviewing NMAs, not RFIs. And I know there's some contractors out there that make everything RFIs. That's not going to continue. That will have to be submitted to the NMA just as you would an ACD. Now, if you use the same form and you put the right terminology on there and say NMA 5 on there, we're not going to question it.
All right. This next question, Richard, has to do with NMA request and the continuation of work. The question reads, does every NMA change form on a project have to be concurred by HCAI's field staff before that work can proceed? If so, there are instances where the project team may have to wait 2 to 3 weeks before a field staff member has the opportunity to review NMAs, which potentially causes scheduling constraints to the construction schedule.
The answer is no. You can proceed with work on a true NMA. When I say true NMA, it's because we don't want you calling something an NMA just so you can proceed with work. If it's materially altering, there are consequences to calling it an NMA just to get the work moving. And one of those consequences could be that NMAs no longer are allowed to proceed with work. So I would say be very careful on what you call an NMA, be very honest about it. And yes, you can proceed with work. You don't have to wait for concurrence. Just make that clear. You don't have to wait for concurrence for work to proceed on an NMA. Now, if something is built by an NMA and it's concurred with, like you said, 3 weeks later, and they've closed up, there may be a chance you have to reopen that to show it was built or convert. So there's a risk. If you're not, again, that's what we say. If you're not sure, ask the question before you do it.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Richard. We do have a question regarding the NMA log. It says, the question reads, it was mentioned that the NMA log is a living document and that the field staff signatures are difficult to manage on that form. Can the field staff signature be on the NMA form only and the date of concurrence recorded in the log?
The answer is yes. I knew I said that was probably confusing the issue because we were originally changing it. We got some complaints. The NMA log does not require any signature by our staff. That is maintained 100% by the design team. They maintain the log. They put what date it was approved. They put the NMA number, if it was concurred with or not. When you submit an NMA for concurrence, include the form. Our staff will either initial and date the form, or they'll stamp and sign it in some way, put a concurrent stamp on it, and return that to you. That's your evidence that the NMA has been concurred with. Now you can update your log accordingly to show the date and who signed it. So hopefully that's clear now.
All right, this has to do with the concurrence of the NMAs, and the question reads, you seem to be saying that we should eliminate ASIs and just use the NMA form. What about Rfis? Are you wanting to see all clarifications as they would typically be non-material? And are you hiring more field staff to review all this?
Well, let's go back to the first part of the question is we're not trying to get rid of ASIs. We're not trying to get rid of Rfis. There's a legitimate reason to have those on your project. An RFI is a request for information from the contractor to the design team, asking a question for clarification. Sometimes those result in a change to the design based on what the answer is or what the question is. ASIs are the exact opposite. An ASI is a architectural supplemental instruction to the contractor to clarify something that might have been missed or not real clear on the drawings. And that's initiated by the design team, either an ASI or an SI. We are not trying to get rid of those. What we're saying is that if either of those or any other type of means of communication requires changes to the documents, the NMA is giving you an alternative to an ACD to get them done faster if they meet one of the 8 requirements. So hopefully that makes a little more sense. This is an alternative to an ACD. Because the default was everything needed to be an ACD, and we don't want to.
All right. This question has to do with incremental projects and NMAs. The question reads, for incremental projects, does the NMA need to be tracked by increment? Also, does the NMA number need to be tracked by a specific discipline, i.e. structural, architectural, etc., or can we have one numbering system for all disciplines?
One numbering system for all disciplines, please. For the incremental projects, once a project that is broken down into increments is approved, the thought is that in theory, those different volumes are reassembled into a single volume. So now you have one set of documents. It was just reviewed in increments. Now there's some catches to that. One is all ACDs, all NMAs fall under the parent number, not under any increment. They will go under just the original HCAI number. Increments at that point are only tracked in the field during construction via for TIOs and for verified compliance reports and for different issues that are done specifically for those increments. But any changes to the drawings go as under the master number because it is considered one project once all the increments are reviewed and approved. So in most of those, the increment, the sub number, the 0102 goes away, other than what was previously approved. Like I said, for TIOs, and so hopefully that helps.
Okay, Richard, this question has to do with the NMA numbering system versus the RFI numbering system. The question reads, why can't the NMA number match the RFI number or ASI number to keep them tied together? It further complicates projects to invent a separate tracking number for different pieces of paper.
Because for us to track NMAs, they have to be sequential, 1 through whatever. You have RFI 45, that's an NMA, and RFI 46 is not. In order, RFI 47 is. Now we're going to have a no NMA 46. So we need a sequential number to search and to track the NMAs. You may have 1,000 RFIs on a project, but only 500 NMAs. So the numbers aren't going to align. So that's why the log should provide the information that you're talking about. You'll have your RFI number or ASI number. Again, the log's going to show any changes, however you choose to track that, but it needs to include the NMA number in a sequential manner. And ideally, if you're doing it in an Excel spreadsheet or something, it's going to be filterable where we can just search the NMA numbers only and see which ones are blank and fill those in. Focus on those.
Hey, Richard, what about deleting scope of work for the project? The question reads, what if we were deleting scope, i.e. temp power, was shown on the plan but is no longer needed to proceed with the work? Can that be an NMA?
Yeah, the answer is going to be it depends on what the change is, what the scope removal is. Because if you're removing a temp power because it's not needed, yeah, that's probably going to be an NMA. It's not required for the project anymore. Just get rid of it. Actually, for temp power, you probably don't need to do anything because you just don't install it. It was never needed. But if you say if you're removing scope from the work and you're adding a new accessible toilet and you're removing that scope, but that accessible toilet may have been required for another reason, yeah, that's material. We need to see that and verify that. Same with you're removing the storage room from the project. Well, storage is required. Are you still meeting the storage requirements because of that removal? So again, it depends on what it is. If it's insignificant scope, like the example you gave, yes, that would be an NMA if required at all. Now, if it's a drawing change, yeah, and we'd need to see that, and it potentially could be an NMA. So that's one of the depends questions.
Hey, Richard, what about the signatures on these NMAs from the design professionals? The question reads, does the AOR need to countersign the NMA form if the NMA is for structure or MEP and has their stamped signature on the NMA form?
No, not on the form, but the drawings still need to comply with 7-115 if there are any drawings attached. So no, if a structural engineer is submitting the NMA, their stamp and signature, because they're the one making the determination that this is non-material. The architect doesn't need to get involved, I should say the DPO, design professional of record, doesn't need to get involved. The design professional of record does need to sign the drawings, even though the structural engineer or electrical engineer stamps and signs the drawings. Again, that's in 7-115. But not on the form. The form can be whoever's making the change.
Richard, this question has to do with going back to previous RFIs on a project. We need to go back on a project that has over 100 RFIs before the date of issuance of the CAN and do the NMA paperwork?
Well, again, we don't review RFIs. So hopefully any changes to the drawings have been, again, this is not a new requirement. NMAs should have always been submitted. Really, all we're requiring in this CAN that's changing is how they're approved and the process for approval with the limitations and stuff like that. NMAs have always been required to be concurred with. So the answer is, if you have past RFIs that need to be NMAs and have not been concurred with, yes, you will need to. You should have done that anyway. But again, we don't review RFIs, so if they are not required to be NMAs, no, you do not have to go back and go through those. But again, I'm hoping that if you have 100 RFIs from the past, that you have already brought those forward. And again, in the past, they may have reviewed RFIs. They may have concurred with them. I know that has happened. So, but we're saying that we do not review RFIs. We should have never been reviewing RFIs. I know that has happened in the past. So to answer your question is, no, you don't, but anything that was changed, if it has not been concurred with yet, would need to be concurred with.
All right, Richard, the next question has to do with field staff availability. The question reads, our CO is only coming once a month. How do we have NMAs reviewed in a timely manner? Can we submit to the DTLA or downtown LA office, I'm assuming? Thank you.
Okay, first of all, NMAs don't hold up construction, so there's not the urgency that you have with an ACD. I do understand that some compliance officers or other field staff do not show up on a weekly basis. So really what we show in here and what we had told staff is that you should be contacting them to find out how best to have these reviewed, because nobody wants these piling up so that next month you have, instead of 5 of these, you have 25 of them. So the idea is to arrange with that field staff how they want to see them. You know, do they want to look at them when they come out to the site and sit down with you and go through them? That may be the fastest way, or they may want you to email them to them so that when they are working off site that they can go through them and then just leave the ones they have questions with for when they see you. So again, there's a lot of options on how they can be reviewed or concurred with. So work with your field staff to find out what works best with them. And if you're not getting them reviewed, then you would contact the regional compliance officer, the RCO, to make arrangements to get them concurred with, because that will happen. Because we don't want to hold you up. And even though these NMAs by the definition do not hold up construction, if they're not getting done, it can cause some problems also. You know, we got a batch in the other day that were from August. It's like, no, that's too late. These things are already built and done with. So.
Hey, Richard, this next question reads, it's regarding UL listings for head of wall conditions. So the question reads, changes that do not materially alter the work, page 7 of your PowerPoint presentation, item 3, under notes refers to top of wall condition. Most approved drawings do not list the UL assemblies, so changing the top of wall system is a change or an NMA if it wasn't identified in the first place.
Again, it's going to be depend on what that says. You said slide 7.
It says page 7 of your PowerPoint presentation, item 3 under notes refers to top of wall condition.
Right. And what that's saying is if you have a top of wall condition that's approved, or if it's a listed system, you can change it if it's an equal system. If you're changing the way it's built, then no, it's now a new system. It's a new design. I'm actually looking at this to see. And I think they're specifically referring to change the top of wall fire resistant materials in this case. Again, you have to look at the detail. If you're just using a different product and the same type of details in NMA, I'm swapping out one listed system for another. But if I'm changing the actual construction of how that's installed and designed, now you have a material change. One of the things we saw recently was, the offset from a beam or something, or the wall had to jog 6 inches. That should be easily addressed with a non-material change, how you're addressing that, because you're not changing the design, it's just the situation out there is changing. And again, it's going to depend on how much offset you have. If it's 3 inches and not changing significantly, you can probably do that with an MA. But if you're offsetting it 2 feet, now you have a different scenario. You have a different detail. So you have to look at it from this, looking at item 3, substitution of equipment, products, or material. Are you substituting equipment, product, or material, or are you changing the design? And that's where the top of wall comes in. If you're changing that design and you're not just substituting a piece in there, now you just convert it to a material change.
So when it comes to reference drawings in NMA request, the question reads: Can we just submit an NMA form describing the change without drawings? For example, duct routing and/or sizing changed in the field that is an NMA. After concurrence, how soon do we need to revise the drawings?
After concurrence, well, first, there's many parts to that question. The first one, sorry about reference drawing. First of all, you don't need drawings to submit an NMA. Drawings go, what do they say, picked photos worth 1,000 words. A drawing is about the same. If you say that you're changing something, you can describe it verbally if it's that simple, but if you're relocating a door, it may be just a quick glance at a plan to make sure that door is still in compliance. So I'm not sure what that has to do with reference drawings, but I would not include reference drawings to substantiate an NMA, but I would include a drawing or a sketch, and these can be 8.5 by 11 sketches or whatever needed to show what that NMA is doing. It could be a snapshot of a full sheet. It could be many different mediums that it comes in on. So I don't know if did that answer the question, Cesar?
Yeah, I believe so. I think we did a good job. If not, they can go ahead. The person who submitted the question, feel free to send us an email at that regsunit@hci.ca.gov email address, and we'd be happy to have an offline conversation about that. Richard, the next question for you it reads: Do you anticipate HCAI field staff requiring concurrent review from other HCAI field staff? Meaning, should we anticipate the CO pushing this over to the FLSO or DSE, or can the field staff person on site make the NMA acceptance on a broader basis?
The answer is yes to both. You may have, again, NMAs by design should be simple enough that someone can look at them and define. If you have a compliance officer that's looking at something that might be structural in nature, but it's pretty obvious it's not material, it doesn't it meets the requirements of non-material, they can probably sign off on it. I mean, I've seen the same thing from fire life safety both ways. But if you have an area that they're not familiar with, yes, they're going to ask their other counterparts to take a look at it. So they may sign off on theirs or forward it to the other individual to get concurrence that, yeah, they're all on the same page. So again, it's going to depend on what the changes are. But again, a non-material change by definition should be simple enough that someone can take a look at it. And I hate to say a no-brainer because some of these aren't no-brainers, but it should be in theory that simple that we can look at it and say, yeah, I can take this for fire. But if I don't have the experience in fire, maybe they request the fire to look at it only, and they can sign off for anyone else. Again, it depends on the nature of it, and they may forward it to the fire or the DSE or the compliance officer, depending on who may have expertise in that topic. But if it's multidisciplinary, yeah, you can anticipate that may have to go. But again, it shouldn't hold up your project. It's just going to slow down the concurrence.
Richard, the next question has to do with IORs and all this. So the question reads, is there a change in project IOR's role on the project with the revised CAN? Do they review Rfis to concur with Dpor's assessment of NMA, or they review only the change log?
The only mention of an IOR in the CAN is specifically to help maintain the change log. I'm not going to get into RFI, who's reviewing RFIs. That's not, as far as I'm concerned, it's not the IOR's decision. It's the design professional's decision to make them may or not. So I would say the IOR should not get involved in that. And I would actually ask Caesar if is there any, do you agree with that?
I would agree with that, Richard. The IOR is going to be reviewing the documents, but us as compliance officers out in the field will be looking at the log and the changes as they come through as NMA requests.
And for those who don't know, Caesar is a compliance officer with our inspection services unit. And that's why I was referring that question back to him.
Right. Thanks, Richard. We have a next question here having to do with the changes. The question reads, do NMA changes need to be clouded on updated drawings? If so, do they need to be distinguished?
Yes. It's treated the same way as any. One of the questions we get is, we can't make revisions to an approved set of drawings, but you do it all the time when you do annotate an RFI or an ASI on a set of plans. You cloud it, you delta it, and you put a number on there. We'd expect the same thing with an NMA. Again, we're not approving the drawings, we're just concurring with the changes, not a material change. So you would just cloud it, delta it, and put an NMA number. I don't know if we're going to get kicked off at 11:30. I can continue if we don't. But for those that do need to go, I thank you for your time. And again, we did partner with AIA. So if you need AIA credits, please contact them. But I'm available to, I think I'm available to continue if we don't get kicked off.
Yeah, if we do get kicked off and your question did not get answered, send us an email over to that email address we keep repeating, which is the regsunit@hci.ca.gov. Or if you'd like to have a offline conversation, a phone call, we'd be happy to schedule that with you as well if we can help. Also, continuing with the questions, Richard, if you're okay with that, we do have another question that says, do we need to issue a separate NMA for each discipline?
No. That was one of the slides. They can be multidisciplined. There can be only one change. So if you're changing the location of a sink, you may have plumbing involved with the relocation of the piping, electrical, if there's any sensors or automatic sensors that are powered. That's one change. It involves 3 disciplines. You're just relocating it. That's one NMA.
This next question, Richard, I think it's a good question. It says, since the NMA criteria started, we have been converting all RFIs that are not obvious ACDs into NMAs. Can you give a few examples of RFIs, etc., that do not need to be brought to the field staff as an NMA?
Yes, colors. What color is this wall? Or we're changing a color. Don't care. Adding clarification, I used this earlier, adding a dimension that's not shown on the plan, but doesn't change the plan. You know, there's just not clear where a wall is located or where a piece of equipment is located. So the contractor says, where is this located? You provide that dimension. Again, you did not change anything on the plans. You just clarified a location for the contractor. That does not require an NMA or an ACD. It's just an RFI and stays an RFI. Those are the two simple examples actually I've been using. But anything that doesn't change what's on the plans, as far as design, we may not need to see it. Again, if you're not sure, ask the question. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you get through this as quickly as possible. I know many of you don't believe that, but we're trying to get this. This is really to streamline the process and help you get through this and have a compliant project.
This next question goes back to previous items that have been brought to the office's attention. Richard, the question reads, for current projects under construction, where we've issued, and we're seeing your teams there on the screen. The question reads, for current projects under construction where we've issued ASIs to resolve approved with comment ACDs, do we now need to go back and make them all NMAs?
If the approved with comment was resolved, no. It's already addressed. If you have the item cleared from the oil list, there's no need to do anything else. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure I followed the whole question.
Yeah, and Richard, if you want to go ahead and relocate your team screen from the shared screen, that'd be great.
I was answering your questions. I forgot it was that. Sorry.
Moving on to the next question.
Okay.
So if there are the question reads, if there are multiple comments that are being addressed, then each comment would need to be an individual NMA. This was for the approved with comments question.
Yes, and that's typically how you open anyway. Yes, and again, hopefully you're getting approved with comments with no more than 2 or 3.
All right, and then this has to do with quantity in the of NMAs. This next question reads, if we have a change with 100 similar items, but all are non-material, do you want them submitted as 100 NMAs? The issue should really be, is it material or not? It should not be the quantity, yes?
Well, the question would be, you have 100 NMAs on several documents. It's going to take a long time to go through those. So, and the answer is, yeah, we rather have 100 NMAs because we may only have time to review 10 of those or 15 of those and clear them off. We may not, if we get 100 NMAs, it's going to be an ACD. It's going to be converted to an ACD, I can tell you that. Even if they're NMA, it's just, again, it's not a matter of how simple it is. It's a matter of the quantity and the time it's going to take to review them. And again, if you have 100 of them, it's figuring out every one of them, what's being done and being looked at. If we have 1, it's a matter of figuring out 1. If we get through 10 of those 100, then you're done with those 10. And the next time we'll hit the other 10 or 15. But if you put 100 on one sheet, it's going to be an ACD. So if you go that route, you have that option, it's going to go the ACD route.
We have a lot of questions regarding RFIs, and I want to ask this question, and this has to do with terminology. The question reads, some GCs prefer to use, quote, confirming RFIs, end quote, to clarify information which would be considered NMA, and frequently do not require document changes. Would the project still be compelled to go through the NMA process?
That's going to be up to the design professional of record. I'm familiar with that process. Again, those would be considered RFIs. Confirming RFIs or RFIs or whatever. Yes, I've heard the term, I've used them. Basically, a confirming confirming RFI by definition is a contractor asks a question with an answer. And all you do is confirm that the answer is correct. That's a true confirming RFI. So if you have an RFI that results in a change to the drawings, I don't care if it's called confirming RFI or not, it would need to be converted into an NMA if it changes the design.
This next question, Richard says, this can refers to the 2019 code only. Projects on previous codes would not apply to this can, correct?
And does not refer to the requirements of the 2019 only. The can is issued based on the 2019, but the code that's in it has not changed in years. So this is a change in process and a change in guidance and just a tool to help. Like, so this can was originally submitted, I think, in 2009 and was rescinded when it went into code. We have since, revitalized it because there are continuing to be a lot of questions and concerns about not only the definitions of what's material or not, but the consistency in how it's concurred with. So except this can was actually written for both industry as well as our staff for internal consistency on how we do this. The same thing with the electrical coordination pin that came out. That is not specific to any one code cycle. It is an instruction on how to do that type of work. And the same thing here. This is just a change in the process. That's why we do have a grace period. If you haven't dealt with any one of these yet in the field, and you've already prepared your 100 NMAs on one sheet, they may or may not look at them based on their grace period. And most likely they'll help, again, if you help walk them through it, they're going to get it done, but the next time they're going to expect compliance with this. And again, doesn't matter if the project's 2013 or 2019 or 2022, the requirement has always been there, just the process all we're changing. So we're not changing the code. So the code still applies as it is. It's just the process we're doing.
So Richard, as it pertains to the stamps on the NMAs, the question reads, whose stamp goes on the NMA form? Only the Dpor in responsible charge or the individual discipline engineer stamp? And does a stamp need a signature?
Thought we already answered that one, but the drawings have the same requirements of any ACD. Whoever made the changes, stamp and sign the drawings. The Dpor only signs the drawings. The form, it can be the design professional of record should be the one stamping and signing that. But if it's a structural change and the structural engineer signs it and stamps and signs the form, as long as they're assigned to the project, there should be no argument about who's actually signing it. The form.
Great. Next question says, it seems like NMAs with more than a single item will trigger an ACD, which could slow the process of changes. Is this the case? If so, this might significantly impact project durations.
Sorry, I hear that my other phone was ringing. I apologize.
This question pertains to the ongoing or the continuation of construction. It says, it seems like NMAs with more than one single item will trigger an ACD, which could slow the processing of changes. Is this the case? If so, this might significantly impact project durations.
My apologies. Someone's trying to get through to me. One more time quickly, sorry.
Yep, no worries. The question reads,
I don't want them calling me back because they keep calling me over and over. So go ahead.
It seems that the NMAs with more than one single item will trigger an ACD, which could slow the processing of changes. Is this the case? If so, this might significantly impact project durations.
Oh, if one MA may trigger an ACD, but that's kind of why we're having you look at it to make sure it's not an MA, providing this guidance. Again, if you're not sure, please contact the compliance officer or the field staff to ask the question. If it happens once, no harm, no foul. We're going to proceed with it. It becomes an ACD. You'll probably be asked to stop work on that particular item while the ACD is being reviewed. But again, if you think it's an ACD, submit it as an ACD. Even if you're not sure, submit it as an ACD. If you don't want to make a phone call, if you're not getting a response, don't slow down the project waiting for it. But the fact that something might be not be concurred with and turned into an ACD, yeah, it may slow down that item. But the whole idea here is that we're getting things done faster for you all. And again, I know the pushback is, I have to do a form for every NMA. But the idea is in the long run, these are going to go a lot smoother and a lot faster and not be delayed, and less risk of something being delayed down the road. And all of a sudden now it's being converted to an ACD because it wasn't seen early on.
All right, and I'm going through these questions here. Next question reads, for the purpose of numbering an NMA log, do we start with NMA number 1 for a RFI number 9, for example?
Yes, please. We would ask that you start with the beginning, because again, we're tracking sequence for the NMAs. You may be on RFI 1000. We don't want to start with NMA 1000.
All right, this next question says, so HCAI doesn't review MA Rfis?
So HCAI doesn't do what?
So the question reads, so HCAI doesn't review MA Rfis? Materially altering Rfis?
I never said that. If an RFI is material altered or non-material altered, it needs to be converted to an ACD or an NMA. We do not review RFIs. Now, if you have an RFI that is neither material or non-material, we don't review those. We don't look at them. We should never see them. They should never be presented to us. If you have an RFI that turns out that will require a change to the drawings, it can be either material or non-material. It does need to be converted to an NMA or an ACD, and then it will be looked at or concurred with or reviewed. We do not review the RFIs.
All right. Next question says, please clarify the process for how the NMA form was deemed an instrument of service, quote unquote, for stamping purposes.
It's an instrument of service. It's something that you're submitting to have reviewed. It's no different than an application or a spec or anything else that you're using to help design the project. It's an instrument of service.
All right, as it pertains to OPDs, Richard, just to clarify, the question reads, OPD details that were not included in the original plan approval can be added to the project as an NMA, question mark. As a follow-up question, will HCAI be providing updated OPDs for the concurrent code cycle?
Yes to one, maybe to the second part. We have extended the dates on the OPDs, and we will be likely providing an update, but it probably won't be for some time on the OPDs. Because right now, I believe they're the 2013 code cycle, and they're good for 2 code cycles, but we've extended them through 2019, but we have 2022 coming around the corner. So they will be extended unless there is a substantial change to the actual code requirements. They're going to be extended. So they should never be rejected if they're being used. So again, when I say never be rejected, if there's something significant on that they want to look at, then they need, it may be looked at differently. But for the most part, the direction to our staff is OPDs will be accepted as NMAs.
All right, we have 15 minutes left till 12, so and we have a couple more questions to go through, so we'll hurry on through these questions. But the next question for you, Richard, and this might be a popular one. The question reads, do you need to upload all of the NMA or subsequent to each NMA for HCAI to have a record when the approval in the field?
No. Take it from today forward. Again, the argument is that the log has always been required. It's never not, it hasn't been not required for several code cycles. Every design team should be maintaining a change log that tracks their ACDs or whatever it might be they add to that. This is not a new requirement, but are we going to go back and say all these NMAs? Most likely not. We're probably going to, if you start naming them NMA 1, that's probably where we're going to start from. And that's how I would recommend doing it.
All right.
Again, this is not the requirement. What has changed in this CAN is specifically the number of NMA changes that can be submitted per NMA and how they're being approved, concurred with. That's what's really changing. All the rest of this stuff has been there all along. So the change logs are not new. The form is. So it's just a FYI.
And I know we went over this question earlier, but I'm seeing a lot more people asking the same question. So I'll ask it again, Richard. And it has to do with the deltas on the NMAs and drawings. The question reads, is it a requirement to revise drawings with a cloud and deltas for each and every NMA?
Yes, just like you would any other changes to the drawings. Any ASI, RFI, NMA will all be documented on the plans because you're modifying what's on the approved plans. Your delta and your cloud is just designated how it was modified under what that tool was used to modify it. So yes, every NMA should be on there just as every RFI that requires an annotation or ASI would be on there.
Hey, Richard, what about reference drawings when NMAs are submitted? Are reference drawings required to be sent also for NMAs?
Required? No. Again, you just want to submit what's needed to approve the NMA or concur with the NMA. Like I said, a sketch goes a long way. A sketch isn't even required. What I wouldn't do was submit full-blown sheets unless there's a real reason to do so, but you can. Again, you want to be able to provide the information for the field staff to review it and concur with it. With enough information, they can do that quickly and simply. The more information you provide, really the more complicated it can get. And I would lean to you, Caesar, you've been reviewing some of these. If you have a difference in opinion, I would welcome it.
Yeah, so I was going to kind of share some experiences when reviewing NMAs. At times we review we open up the document, and within the change, it refers to a detail, for example, that is being referred but was not submitted as part of the NMA, which everything needs, we pause and we have to do some more research. So it goes above and beyond the 5-10 minutes that we're taking to review these things. So as a suggestion, I would suggest that if your change is referring to another drawing, another sheet, another detail, that you submit that as part of the package.
Yeah, when I'm thinking of reference drawings would be like a set of drawings that's uploaded, the whole set. I would expect that you provide the drawings and the sketches related to what you're changing. Again, as Caesar mentioned, if you're referring to another detail or an elevation, I would expect that detail or elevation to be included as part of the NMA. I wouldn't call that necessarily a reference drawing though, but you definitely want to include it to, again, you want to make it simple for us.
Great, Richard. The next question reads, are NMAs only reviewed by field staff or can they be reviewed by office staff as well?
Only reviewed by field staff. Or ISU.
All right.
But they'd be submitted and done in the field.
All right, we're almost done here. And we have 10 minutes to go, so we're gonna meet the mark, I believe. Next question is, can NMA sequential number start with, for example, 76 if the last ASI is 75 and Dpor wants to use only NMA numbers?
That would be between you and the field staff. Our preference is to start at 1 if you're starting mid-project or beginning of a project. They don't need to correlate with anything else. But if it's clear to your compliance officer that you're starting, just continuing a sequence, and that's just going to change the terminology, that's between you and them. Again, all we're doing is we're trying to make this clear. So if it's clear and they understand, they accept it, go for it.
Richard, and this next question, it's more of a request. It's asking that you provide more examples of non-NMA Rfis. Is that something you can give a little more insight into?
Non-NMA RFI, I can probably dig through a series of RFIs. I can't do, I'm just trying to pull them out of my head right now. Basically, the best examples would be you're not changing anything on the drawings that would change the design. You're not moving walls, you're not moving outlets, you're not moving doors, you're not moving anything, you're changing power, you're not changing HVAC, you're just answering a question for the contractor for clarification. Again, RFI should be a request for information. The contract's asking a question, you answer it. It doesn't change anything in your design, but there might have been something missing on the drawings to a note, a dimension, a shading, something on the drawing that was missing that was just to make it clear. You answer the question, you don't have to change the drawing. You may add a note or something to the drawing just to repeat what the question was for the RFI and annotate it that way. That's what we're talking about by there's no change to the design. You know, what piece of equipment is this? There's a box, it's empty, there's no tag on it. The piece of equipment's detailed for anchorage or something, you're just putting the label on it. No change to the drawings. You're physically changing the drawing, but there's no change to the design. You're just clarifying information that might have been obscure or missing.
Richard, this next question.
All RFIs would be that way, but it's not the case.
This next question still, it seems like some of our attendees are still unclear about the RFI process. It says, if I understand correctly, RFIs can be classified by the Dpor as an NMA or a material change or neither, question mark.
Correct. RFI can be designated to be an NMA, an ACD, or nothing. It just doesn't need to be seen. That's up to the design professional of record. Again, we just gave some brief examples of what would require no action or no look whatsoever. If you're altering the design, then you have to decide, is it non-material change or is it a material change?
Richard, the next question says, if one sheet has several details and there are changes on multiple details in the sheet that do not materially alter the work, do we need multiple NMA numbers on the same sheet?
Say that one more time, please.
If one sheet has several details and there are changes on multiple details in the same sheet that do not materially alter the work, do we need multiple NMA numbers on the same sheet?
Again, it depends what the change is. If you're changing the substance of each detail, I would expect a new NMA so each one can be looked at. If you're changing, say, the type of screw on 10 details, that's one change. Same with an air balance report. You might have 15 changes to an air balance report. That's only one change, non-material change. There's several examples of that. If you're relocating several outlets within the same room, you can do that as one NMA.
All right.
So if you're getting 10 details on a single sheet, it depends what the change is. If it's the same change to all the details, no, it's an NMA, it's one change. But you're affecting 10 details or maybe more, several sheets, it's still one NMA. But if you're doing a different change to each detail, that's a separate item.
All right. This is more of a clarification or asking for you to repeat what you had said, Richard. As it pertains to the OPDs, it's asking, can you please confirm what Richard said earlier during a Q&A that an OPD that is not in the approved drawing could be added to the drawing as an NMA?
Yes. Again, I'm going to always clarify that with, if there is something significant about that triggers a question, it may go into a different category. As a general rule, OTD's already approved. It's a pre-approved detail. It can be added to your project. Now, if the compliance officer looks at this and you have a wood frame detail going into a metal frame building, they're going to question, say, are you sure you want to do this? I mean, you have to look at each one, but and as a general rule, yes, they will be added to the drawing as NMA. They're already approved. What they're going to be looking for at that point is that, does it really apply to that project? And you may have to show where it applies. Again, that would be part of an NMA. I want to use this detail at this location. It's pre-approved. We had a question yesterday saying, we have wall framing details. Well, if they add a new wall, it's NMA. No, the location of the wall is not part of the detail. The detail is the construction of the wall. So if you move a wall or add a wall, you now have a material change, or could have a material change. But the pre-approved detail is just how that wall is constructed. Now you don't need a ACD for that to add that OPD.
This next question, Richard, it has to do with clarification and interpretation of NMAs. It reads, clarification/interpretation is listed as an NMA type. However, it sounds like I just heard it said that clarifications/interpretations do not require an NMA because they do not affect the drawings. Please clarify.
That's correct. It could be either one. You're asking for a clarification for a dimension that's not shown on the drawing, but it doesn't change the location of anything. You're just saying this is 12 inches from the wall. You can just answer that on an RFI. We don't need to see that information. You're probably going to add it to the drawings and cloud it and delta as the RFI number. We don't need to see that. If you're doing a clarification that does result in a change, and you have to clarify something on the drawing by adding something to the drawing that wasn't there previously. Example, a piece of, I'm just throwing this and pulling this out of my head. Something is missing in a run from one place to another, and you need to add something there. Now you're adding something that's typically, it's non-material, but you're changing what's on the drawings. Say if you're missing a exhaust duct in a room, and there's nothing showing where it's connecting to. I'm just pulling this out of my head, and you're now adding that duct run to answer that RFI. That can be considered non-material. It's not material, but it wasn't there. You're adding something to the drawings. It's a clarification. It wasn't there before. I'm clarifying that needs to be, this diffuser needs to be connected to the rest of the return line or the exhaust line, that's now non-material. It just wasn't fully clear on the drawings. You're clarifying the information. It is a non-material change because you are changing what was on the drawing because it wasn't there previously. And again, there's a fine line there. You're going to probably see it go both ways, but this is that's what we're saying. There are some things we do not need to see. And that's actually to your benefit.
Well, Richard, we've come to 12 o'clock. I think we've gone over the questions, and I believe we've answered the majority of those questions. So if okay with you, I'd like to go ahead and end the webinar with some closing remarks.
Yes, I'd like to thank you all for participating. And thank you all for your questions. We will be recording this and posting it probably in a few weeks, but Caesar might be covering that as well. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you for being here. If you haven't done so already, or if you don't know, we have some of our past webinars on our website, and they're on there. They're in video format. They're transcribed. For example, the accessibility CAN and healthcare facilities, CAN 2-11B, OSHPOD 3 clinics, temporary structures, engineering judgments, CAN 2-703.3. All of those are on our website and available for you to download. So you can go ahead and use those and feel free to download them if you'd like. Also, if you remember, send us an email over to regsunit@hci.ca.gov if we didn't get your question, or if we try to answer your question and you feel that it didn't quite get answered the way that you were looking for, or need some further clarification, send us an email over to regsunit@hcai.ca.gov. And if you haven't done so already, or if you know people who haven't subscribed to our listserv, encourage them to do so they can get notified of webinars such like this, or tips of the days, or other notifications and documents that HCAI will set out for the in that listserv functions. So go to our website, on the upper right-hand corner, click subscribe, enter all of your name, information, email address, and we'd be happy to share all of that information with you. Again, it's been a pleasure being with all of you today. Thank you for what you do and doing your part in providing access to safe, quality healthcare environments throughout the state of California. Thank you, and hope you have a good rest of your day.